So anyway, today's talk is words have meaning. And understanding words is important. We know that because, well, if I'm speaking, well, if you're speaking, some of you speak Spanish. If you're speaking Spanish, I'll have no idea what you're saying. Words have meaning, and we need to be able to understand that meaning. But there's something more important about words. Whoever controls the vocabulary controls the debate, which means whoever gives the meaning to the words will control the debate. And that's because whoever controls the vocabulary controls how you speak, which means they control how you think, because you think in words. And they control your understanding of the world, because you understand the world through words. And that means, by establishing the definition of words, they control your perception of truth. And that means words are important. So we're going to start today by talking about the word evolution. Now, last year I took a course. Yes, teachers go to school. I took a course that taught teachers. And it taught teachers how to teach evolution. It was taught by the American Museum of Natural History in New York. And what's interesting about this course is they had a very difficult time defining the word evolution. You would think if the course is about evolution, then you define the word, then you know what you're talking about. But they couldn't define it. In fact, they had this online forum where you could go and discuss things, and there was 20 or 30 discussions going on. One of them was about the definition of evolution, and that discussion was huge. It was like 3 times bigger than any other discussion. And they couldn't define evolution. And finally, the professor came on, and he defined evolution. And this is what he wrote. Notice he starts out by saying he specifically intended not to define evolution. I specifically did not want to define evolution. Some see evolution as gene change, descent with modification, origin of species, etc. Systematists think in terms of speciation or descent with modification. Watch this next line. Evolution as change over time is fine. So there's his definition. And that applies to all evolutionary systems. Physical, chemical, geological, and biological. So I've highlighted those are the ways he's defined evolution. And we're going to take a look at each one of these. And we're going to start with the one that he says is fine. This is his definition of evolution. Change over time. And to do this, well, I got a stack of textbooks up here, and the Bible on top of them all. But we're going to look at one of these textbooks. It's a biology textbook. And they have the same definition. It's a very common definition. Page 10, change over time, or evolution. Is that truly a definition of evolution? Well, this picture shows commonly what we see as evolution. It's used to represent evolution. It shows a chimpanzee slowly changing to become a man. That's change over time, right? So that's evolution. What about that picture? That's me on the right, by the way. I have no idea how old I am in that picture. Have I changed since then? I've changed over time. No, he says, no. I'm evolving, aren't I? I'm changing over time. That's evolution. So the definition of evolution as being change over time, that's a little bit too broad, isn't it? It includes just about everything. I have a 1977 Chevy van that's slowly rusting. Hey, hi, Julio. I have a 77 Chevy van that's slowly rusting. It's changing over time. Does that mean my van is evolving? No, of course not. So I think we need a better definition of evolution than just change over time. So we've got some of these others here. Let's look at some of these others first. For example, gene change, descent with modification. Now that sounds very scientific, doesn't it? Sounds pretty good. But think about it. What does that mean? Modification is change, and if you pass it on to your descendants, that takes place over time. So really all that means is descent with modification is change over time. It's the same thing. How about gene change? I mean, that's the same thing. That's descent with modification. That also means change with time. So it just simply all means the same thing. And how about, okay, origin of species and speciation? Well, that again, it's two ways of saying the same thing, but we don't know too much about speciation, so let's take a few minutes to talk about this, because they all have to do with change over time. So what is a species? There we got it. Cat species. For example, these are all cats, but they're all of the same genus. They're all the same type. But look, they're all different. We've got, I think there's a panther, we've got a tiger, a leopard, a lion, and a house cat there. Originally, there was one kind of cat. And over time, through natural selection, which, by the way, we believe in natural selection, it does really work, we now have multiple species of cats. We agree on this. It's change over time. Is this evolution? Think about it. Is this evolution? What are they? Cats. They're cats, right. They're still cats. For evolution to happen, we need to see them become something other than a cat. But in all of history of cats, when cats breed, what do we get? Cats. More cats. Nothing changes. So, we have change over time, but not evolution. Even though it involves genetic change, it is still not evolution. We need to add something to this definition. So, let's take a look at the, well, we're just saying, this is not a good definition. Page 17 of the same biology book. The gradual change in populations from one generation to the next. We're defining evolution again. And that looks like what? Change over time. So let's add the second part to this now, which has led through natural selection to the biological diversity we see around us. There it is. We've got it. A definition of evolution, because the proof is right there. What do we see when we look outside? We see a huge biological diversity, right? That's the definition of evolution. You look out the window, it's proved true, right? Well, not quite, because you got to be careful. They're including the definition of evolution in the proof of the definition in the definition. And that's circular reasoning. What we need to do, if we use this definition, and I think it's not a bad definition, what we need to do to prove evolution is true, we need to see if it really matches the definition. The proof is to not just see diversity, but to see diversity happening. Evolution claims that starting with a single type of life, maybe like a single-cell organism, diversity happened millions and millions of times, possibly tens of millions of times, resulting in new types of life. For evolution to be true, we should see evidence of that one type of life becoming different types of life. A cat, for example, becoming something other than a cat. Common example that are used are dogs. I mean, look at all the different types of dogs. Many, many different types of dogs. Dogs all started with a wolf. They started with one pair of wolves, and they diversified from there until we have a lot of different dogs. But what are they? They're dogs. That's not diversity. We can't look at the world and say, look at all the different types of dogs, look at all the different types of cats. That's diversity. Evolution is true. Those are species. They're not dogs. Or in the case of dogs, they're breeds. Aha! I can hear some of you thinking this. For biological diversity to happen, it takes what? Millions of years, right? And we only can see it in the fossil record. Science and fossils tells us that evolution happened, meaning change over long periods of time happened, and that created the biological diversity we see today. Now, before we continue too far down this trail, remember what we're talking about here. Words are important. The definition of words are important. So we need to define what word? Science. Let's find out what science means. Let's go back to the textbook. Science, systematically testing alternative proposals. If these proposals prove inconsistent with experimental observation, they are rejected as untrue. We've got some key words we want to look at here in this definition of science. The word testing and experimental observation. Because what we're talking about is empirical science. Now, when did fossils happen? When did they get created? In the past. So, can we test the past? No. Can we do experiments on the past? No, can't do that. Can we directly observe the past? No. So, we can't do this definition of science. We can't test it. We can't observe it. What we can do is observe and test things from the past as they exist here in the present. And that means we always are making assumptions about the past. A major assumption, for example, is that the past is like the present. But that's just an assumption. So if we can't do empirical science on the past, how do we study the past? Good example to look at. We can look at crime scene investigations. Forensic detectives, they have to go to a crime scene and find out what happened when? In the past. So what we do is we study and collect evidence in the present in order to study the past. And we can use empirical science to study that evidence in the present, but then we must make assumptions about what we've observed in the present and what that means about the past. So as much as police detectives would like to, they can't go back into the past and directly test and observe either. You can't do empirical science on the past. What we do is called historical science. We can examine and test objects in the present, make some assumptions, and then make conclusions about what we think happened in the past. And this means that you'll often hear words such as, oh, we think, it's likely that, possibly, could be, maybe, probably. Just listen, and you'll hear those words. In other words, we don't know for sure. And we can never know about the past with 100% certainty, except when we have what? What can give us 100% certainty about the past? Eyewitness. Exactly right. An eyewitness who was there and saw the past. In a criminal case, the best evidence isn't eyewitness evidence. So, when we're looking at questions of evolution and the age of the earth, eyewitness testimony would be the best testimony. But do we have an eyewitness? Yeah, sure we do. God was there. He did it. He made it. And he wrote down his eyewitness testimony, gave it to us in the Bible. It's not intended as a science book, but the Bible is packed with facts that help us understand the past. There's a lot of information there. But if there's no eyewitness, what do we do then? Well, in criminal cases, the answer is determined by, and this is an important word, the preponderance of the evidence. When you're studying the past, you are never going to get 100% certainty. There's always going to be some evidence that supports this side and some evidence that supports this side. So what you look for is, well, not a balancing of evidence, not a slight unbalancing. You're looking for a preponderance of the evidence. Up here, no, down here, the weight of the evidence is so strong that it's obvious that that's the answer. So, what do we have when we look for the evidence for evolution? We have the preponderance of the evidence is that evolution never happened. Even many secular scientists, if you're watching some of the quotes before this session started, secular scientists admit in their own discussions among themselves, evolution is impossible. Well, anyway, we got to get back on track, though. We're talking about the meaning of words, so we've defined some words for science. So we were talking about, what was the question? Oh, yes, we were talking about the proof for that definition of evolution. Is it true? We need to see diversity happening. So, do we see diversity happening in the fossil record? They're called transitional fossils. And so we would need to actually see some transitional fossils that resulted in diversity. So the question is, are there any transitional fossils? I mean, you'll hear people claim, oh, there's lots of transitional fossils. You talk to somebody, they'll say, oh yeah, there's so many transitional fossils, evolution has been proved. And then ask them to name one. And usually they can't. And we're going to talk about actually some specific examples later, such as Archaeopteryx. That's one that does get named every now and then. But if they, in fact, do name one, it's going to turn out not to be a transitional fossil. The truth is there's no transitional fossils. Now, I could spend the rest of the afternoon talking about this and showing examples, but we're here to talk about words and defining words. So I'm going to let an evolutionist speak on this subject. He is he's passed away, but he was the head of the paleontology department at the British Museum of Natural Science. So we'll see what he says about transitional fossils. What he says is, I fully agree. Well, what happened is this guy wrote a book called Evolution. The book, he's an evolutionist. His book is all about evolution. Somebody read that book and then wrote him a letter saying, how come you don't show any transitional fossils in your book? there should be transitional fossils in your book. So this is what he wrote back. He said, I fully agree with your comments on the lack of direct illustration of evolutionary transitions in my book. If I knew of any, fossil or living, I would certainly have included them. This is the leading expert in the world saying what? There are no transitional fossils. And he goes on to say, now bringing in some other authorities, yet Gould, that's Stephen Jay Gould, he was a preeminent Harvard paleontologist, and the American Museum people, that's the premier U.S. paleontology museum in America, it's hard to contradict them. In other words, he's saying if I said there were transitional fossils, I would be contradicting these big-name people. So they say there's no transitional fossils. So I will lay it on the line. There is not one such fossil for which one could make a watertight argument. So based on the textbook's definition of evolution, there is absolutely no proof for evolution. We see change, but we do not see diversity. But we got to get back to talking about words, and I'd like to talk about some of the words from the Bible. So we're going to look at words from the Bible, because words in the Bible have meaning also. They're very carefully selected. When a Bible's translated into English, the words that are used are very carefully selected to transmit the proper meaning. So, let's first start actually by, we're going to look at Genesis. We're going to take a quick look at some of the principles of translating the Old Testament, of translating Hebrew. By the way, translating the Bible, it's not done by a guy who sits in the room and he reads the Hebrew and he goes, okay, I think it says this, and he writes down the translation. Translation is usually done by a large team of scholars, and they have to come to an agreement on what that translation means. It involves more than just one person. And what do? Well, translation will be based on the earliest Hebrew manuscripts. In my Bible, the NASB, they go to the biblical Hebrea, which is about the oldest you can get. It's dated 1000 AD. They go to the Dead Sea Scrolls, but then they use other sources also, such as the Septuagint and the Vulgate, in order to look at what they've translated and then see if it's correct. I mean, the Septuagint, that is the Greek translation of the Old Testament that was done by Jewish people about 200 years before Christ. 70 of them, that's why it's called Septuagint, 70 of them got together and translated the Hebrew to Greek, because so many Jews were speaking Greek at that time. They were part of the Greek Empire. So there you have a translation done by Hebrews 200 years before Jesus into Greek, which Greek is actually much easier to translate into English. It has more of a one-to-one correspondence on words. So you got a way to check whether your translation of Hebrew is correct. The Vulgate, that refers to Latin translations, and we have translations of the Vulgate from about 400 years after Christ. So again, you get people that are very close to the time of Christ translating, and you can use it as a check to be sure we've got the words right when we translate the Old Testament today. So we're going to look at two words in Genesis, and the first word is beginning. This is a new word. It's not a new word, but it's newly under attack by mainly liberal scholars that are saying, well, beginning doesn't mean beginning. Let's see what they're talking about here. First off, the word that they're translating here is the Hebrew word reshet, and it's translated a number of ways depending on the context. It'll be translated as beginning, as first of, as first fruits, but those words don't work if you want to fit billions of years into the Bible. So they've come up with a new definition, and the new definition is reshet means a period of time before a series of events. So how do you know which one's right? Is this new translation right, or does beginning mean beginning? Well, there's a couple of things that those of us, by the way, any Hebrew scholars here? Okay, we're going to use the methods now that non-Hebrew scholars can use to find out if the translation is a good translation. There's a couple of things we can look at. One of the things we can do is, reshet is used a lot in the Old Testament, so we can check and see how it is translated in other locations. For example, it is sometimes translated as first fruit, as we see here in Deuteronomy 18:4, and it's also translated first of, so we get both of those translations here in Deuteronomy 18:4. So what we can do is now we can substitute the alternate translation into this verse and see what happens. How does it work? So we get, the beginning also of your corn, of your wine, and of your oil, and the beginning of the fleece of your sheep shall you give. Now, that's not as smooth of a reading, but we still can understand it. You plant the corn, it starts growing, you get your first ears of corn, that's the beginning of the corn, and you are to give that to God. You're shearing your sheep. The first ones you shear, your first wool, that you're to give to God. So although it's not a smooth reading, we can still understand it. So, yeah, that says, okay, that works. Either word works. Let's look at the New Translation. And I tried every which way to try to fit this in. And then the best I can come up with, the time before also of your corn, whatever that means, of your wine and of your oil, and before the fleece of your sheep, or you could say, and the time before the fleece of your sheep shall you give him. Okay, that's not really quite sure what that means. That doesn't really fit very well. Now, this is not an ironclad rule, but it's a good indication that this New Translation is not so good. There's another thing. One of the things I like to do, I have a lot of different Bible translations. And I find it useful. I'm reading something, I go, I don't understand this. And I'll read it in a different translation, and that'll help. So another thing we can do is look at a number of other Bible translations and see how they translate this word. So let's see how many translated as beginning and how many translated as something else. Well, all of them translated as beginning. So, and what that tells you is that numerous groups of scholars all agree that it should be translated as beginning. I even picked out one. We have Spanish there at the bottom, where it was translated from Hebrew to Spanish. And that one actually says at the beginning, not in the beginning. Same thing, though. Same meaning. So we can tell by looking at these clues that, yes, what they're trying to do is force millions of years into the Bible, and they're not staying true to the true translation, where beginning means beginning. A third alternative we have is we can look it up in a concordance in Strong's and find out what Strong's says. In this case, this is one of the words that Strong's lists in the back, where they just list all the words. They don't give you the number, so you can't really find the translation. But Strong's does have the next word that we're going to look at. So let's move on to the next word, which is yom, which is day. There has been so much said on this issue, I really find it hard to believe that anybody can be saying, well, the days in Genesis are really millions of years. It just doesn't work. But let's look at the logic behind that. Again, let's look at translation, because some people take it and say, oh, day means long periods of time. And, well, even just think about this. If it took millions of years for each day, God created the plants on day 3. When did he create the sun that the plants need? 1 million years later? That doesn't make sense. And then if you're trying to fit evolution into the Bible, if you look at the order of the way things happen in evolution, it doesn't match the order, the way God created things. So it doesn't... Anyway, let's go on. We're talking about the meaning of words, so let's get back. Let's stick to the word yom here. So, how do we know what yom means? And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. How do we tell what that word day means? From the context. We look at how it's used. So we're going to start with, here's Strong's. Can you read that? No, okay, we'll get a little bit closer. There we go. There's Strong's, and it's talking about, this is the meaning of the word day, and it actually starts out up here, the root. It actually means to be hot, the warm part of the day, which refers to sunrise to sunset, or in some cases, sunset to sunset. That is the root of what the word yom means, which is essentially a 24-hour day or a daylight day. Strong's will also give us a list of all the ways that word is translated. So we see that the word day is the word yom is translated as day 2,008 times. far more than any other way it's translated. It's translated as time 64 times. And when it's translated that way, it's translated as an undefinite point in time, such as, oh, someday we'll get together for lunch. So it's still kind of has that general meaning, but it's just indefinite. It's translated as daily 32 times. It's translated as the word ever 17 times, but every time it's translated as ever, it always is with the word for, as in forever. And it is translated as year 14 times. So we have all these different definitions, the preponderance of them being day, but different definitions for yom. So how do we know the meaning, the right meaning? By the context. For example, yom is used along with evening and morning, other places in the Bible, and every time it is used that way, it always means a 24-hour day. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. The context, evening, morning, day, always means a 24-hour day. To call it anything else in Genesis, you're making an exception to everything in the Bible. But you know what? Genesis, it's as if God knew people were going to try to deny that a day means a day. And God wanted to be sure that we really did understand that it means a 24-hour day. So he gives us a second context for this word, and it's the context of numbers. The context is, if there's a number, or counting, number, day, counting, it's always a 24-hour day again. In Genesis, God numbers the days. It's the context. It means 24 hours. There's no doubt that God meant 24 hours days. Yom in Genesis means a 24-hour day. So let's quickly review. Evolution. It is not change over time. Don't ever let anybody get away with that definition. The definition must include the change from one kind to another, something that we've never seen. Empirical science, it involves testing and observing the results, something we can only do in the present. This is the type of science that has given us like computers and cell phones and medical technology. Empirical science, where we test something in the present, get the results, and develop new things. Historical science. Remember, that's like investigating a murder mystery, a forensic detective investigating a mystery. In historical science, remember, there will always be some evidence supporting this, some evidence supporting that, which is why they call it the preponderance of the evidence. Big difference, the preponderance of the evidence. Most of the evidence indicating one side is true. Beginning. In the Bible, in Genesis, the word beginning means what? Beginning. Thank you. Thank you. And then the word yom. It means a 24-hour day. And to make sure that we understand that, Exodus 20:11 plainly says, "For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and rested on the seventh day." Words are important. And it's important that words be defined correctly. If evolution is defined as change over time, then what? You can look anywhere and see change over time, and that proves evolution is true. But if you have to have the correct definition, you'll see that there's absolutely no evidence for evolution. So when somebody says, evolution, oh, it's supported by all the evidence, start asking them. Ask this question, well, what do you mean by evolution? And when I ask that question, what I find happens is they'll define it as change over time, and they'll say, well, it's change over time resulting in different kinds. And they go, no. They won't accept that because they immediately know that you define it that way and evolution is false. Words are important. Remember that. They must be defined correctly. And we've got, I notice it's exactly a half hour, so we've got a few moments if there's any questions. And thank you very much. You've been a great audience. This is I mean, you're just fantastic. Thank you. Oh, we have a question.
Yeah, I have a question. Steve, is there anywhere else beside the two places that you showed with a number before yom, the day, that helps us see this 24-hour day?
Yes, there is. I don't have them memorized, but I can look those up. And yeah, because it is used elsewhere in the Bible where it'll say, like, on the 5th day, something happened.
Yeah.
Or 3 days late. So, yes, that is the common use throughout the Old Testament.
And the same thing, I know what you're saying is true. I just wonder if you have it on hand. But the second question is, how about do we see any other place in the Bible where there was an evening and a morning with the word yom besides Genesis?
Yes, there are lots of them.
Really? Okay.
So I appreciate you asking the question. So in the video, we'll actually put those on the screen so people can see some of those, because I don't have any of them memorized. But from my memory, it's somewhere in the range of at least 300 occurring. I mean, it's a lot. It's not just one or two. It's the preponderance of the evidence, if you want to put it that way. And I think actually in every case when it's used with an evening and morning, every case when it's used with a number, it always means a day, 24-hour day. No exceptions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
A couple of thoughts. First, a comment, then a question. I really liked how you mentioned also Exodus 20:11, because looking at context, in Exodus 20, you have the 10 Commandments. In Exodus 20:8-11 is the commandment for the Sabbath day. And God specifically saying there, it's like, hey, it's a nation of Israel, you need to go and work 6 days, but yet you have to rest on the 7th day, because God set the pattern. He worked 6 days, and then he rested the 7th day. If you were saying, oh, well, these aren't literal days, then you could get all sorts of weird economic problems and stuff, with different people working for thousands of years and then resting for thousands of years.
Well, yeah, essentially the example would be you would have to work your whole life because you'd never get to that million years of work before you even get any rest. So,
and then the question I had was thinking, your thoughts on defining evolution good, but I was thinking, at least for me, it seems like there's, from what I understand, there's macroevolution, which is the false evolutionary theory idea such of life coming from non-life and different kinds producing different kinds over millions of years. And then microevolution, if I understand correctly, is the idea of different cats producing different cats over time, not producing dogs or birds or things.
Yeah, change within a kind, and the terms macro and microevolution are getting the water is getting very muddied, but it essentially means as creationists we believe that life changes. We see lots of different cats. You do get changes, and actually the latest research is showing that we can actually acquire genetic changes through our lives, and it affects what's called the epigenetic material, which we actually have genetic material in sugars on the surface of our cells. And we can actually, that changes through our lives. And that would all be microevolution, and I don't even like putting the word evolution there, because that confuses people. Oh, it's evolution. So I just say, well, that would be change over time, would be appropriate to say that things change. But evolution, and I like to stick with evolution and what we would be calling macroevolution. Evolution means change over time with new types of life coming from existing life. Something new that we've never seen before that would be a new type of life. A cat giving birth to a dog.
Kind. Is kind the key word?
Kind is the key word. You could also use type if you want, but to indicate it's not a cat. And in many cases, for example, I've got some pictures of mice. And you see mice that really don't even look like mice, but they're still mice. And that's called homology, where you look at how things look. They're still, though, of the same type. They came from original mice somewhere, and even though they may look different, we'll talk about in the second session, for example, fruit flies and how they worked really hard to mutate fruit flies. So you get fruit flies with legs coming out of their heads. They look very different. They're still fruit flies. Yeah, Julio.
Bueno, le voy a decir a Dani para que lo traduzca.
Okay, a ver.
Se puede entender como lo que nos dijo ayer que los genes van cambiando, igual como, o sea, no es evolución, sino en el cuerpo
Would that be something similar to what we were talking about last night, where the genes seem to be changing? At least we were talking last night about the we were a purer form, and with time we couldn't you couldn't marry among brothers and sisters.
Yeah. That's similar because, yes, our genetic code, the DNA, is changing over time, and it's actually changing very rapidly, and it's changing as time goes on, it's changing faster. And we're actually getting to a point where we're accumulating mutations very rapidly. But what has been found is that mutations always result in a loss of information, meaning you're going downhill. Now, that can be advantageous in some cases. For example, bacteria become resistant to penicillin. And you go, oh, well, they got better. They can survive penicillin. Well, the way that happened is they mutated so that they have some protein receptors that normally would receive penicillin, and that kills them. Now they don't have those protein receptors, and now the penicillin essentially can't stick to them, and they live. So what happened is they lost information, they degraded, and that actually turned out to be an advantage. So that can confuse things a little bit, but no, we are going downhill. You're right, we're mutating just like Jim said last night. The mutations are accumulating, and now if you marry somebody close in your family, two bad mutations can come together and be expressed, and you end up having deformities and birth defects, and so that's why you can't marry within your family anymore. Yeah, Jim.
Dave, should we be, as Christians, should we change the word evolution into devolution?
I would love to. That would be a hard one to do. The question is, should we change evolution into devolution? Because that's the truth. That's what is happening. Evolution means we're supposedly getting better. Devolution means we're getting worse. And the latest genetic research says we're getting worse, and it's happening rapidly. Worse means that eventually we're not going to be able to reproduce. I mean, we'll still be alive, but eventually all the kids you have will not survive. It'll get that bad. And we're actually very close to that tipping point now. There's some debate as to how quickly that would be. Jim mentioned, somebody said 100 years. I usually throw out, when people say how long, I'll say 1,000 years, because I know easily the human race will not survive 1,000 years from now. It cannot happen, because we are de-evolving at such a rate that we will no longer be able to reproduce. And we can see